about little gods. Now, what's a god? A god is anything that dominates your life. It's anything that controls your life. Say, well, how about a career? Can career be a god? You bet it can. Can another person be a god? Yep. Can golf be a god? Even if you play the way that I play, it can still be a god, you know. Even good things that God has created for us to enjoy become gods when you give them first place in your life. God says, you know, this is wrong. I deserve first place in your life. So this is the foundation. Put God first. In fact, let's say it together. 1, 2, 3. Put God first. You know, today in America, families, they're dropping like flies. And they're falling apart faster than we can put them together. Why are so many marriages crumbling? It's because they're built on the wrong foundation. You see, friends, it doesn't matter how much money you put into it. It's not going to last unless it's built on the right foundation. You want to be successful? Put God first. Wherever you want God to bless, put Him first in that area. He'll bless it. Number 2, don't idolize anything. Don't idolize anything. You say, well, what's an idol? An idol is anything that takes the focus off of God and puts it onto something else. So when anything else is first in my life, that's not God. And if it's an idol, it's not good. Now, what does it mean to idolize? In this sense, it means to value something more than God. Some people, they park their idols in their garage. Some people dock their idols at the lake. Other people put their idols in their safety deposit boxes. Even today, we deal with idols. Now, it's interesting. Archaeologists tell us in every culture throughout history there have been idols. Statues, little gods, goddesses, things like this. There's this desire of man for some reason to turn objects or people or things into objects of worship. God says, don't do that. Not you shouldn't do that. He says, don't do that. Now, in Bible times, there were 3 primary idols. There was Baal, who was the god of sex. There was Mammon, who was the god of money. And there was Molech, who was the god of violence. Sounds a little familiar. Now, we don't have those metal idols today. We just pay billions of dollars today to go to the movies to watch the sex and the money and the violence. It's funny, it's the same things. You see, in those days their idols were made of stone and brick and rock and clay and wood or metal or whatever. But today we have mental images, not metal images. We have a shrine in America that's a little box that we plug in that we call our TV set. And every night we turn it on and we see our idols on TV. In fact, what's one of the top shows? American what? American Idol, you know? And it's very difficult to raise your kids in an environment where society is saying, these are the most important things in life, and you're trying to say, no? Really? There's more things that are more important, more values that are more important. So we have to teach our kids the disadvantages of idols. Deuteronomy chapter 4 says, for your own good, don't sin by making an idol in any form at all. You might even circle that phrase, for your own good. He says, for your own good, don't make an idol. People wear their idols on t-shirts. They proudly proclaim, this is what we're committed to. God says, for your own good, for your own sake, don't idolize anything. Number 3, take God seriously. Take God seriously. Paul Dickinson has written a book called Names, and he has a hobby of collecting strange and unusual names. He says that sometimes people's names, catch this, he says their names can be quite prophetic. In 1941, there were 2 men who were executing the electric chair in the state of Florida. Their names, Wilburn and Frizzle. True story. Recently, there was a Montreal window washer who died by accident falling as he was washing windows. His name, Will Drop. Others, he says, seem destined for a certain occupation. Joe Bunt became a baseball coach. Dan Druff became a barber. Go Forth and Ketchum, 2 guys became police officers and later partners. O'Neill and Prey became partners in church equipment. Wonderfully Tremblay was a psychologist. Isn't it funny? What's in a name? God says there's a lot in a name when it's His name. And in the third commandment, Exodus chapter 20, verse 7, He says, "You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God." Now, why is God so sensitive about His name? You see, God says that your name represents three things, okay? And you might have room in your notes to scribble these down. Reputation, character, and authority. He says it represents your reputation. You've heard people say He's making a name for Himself. When somebody has a good reputation, they say He's got a good name. When he's got a bad reputation, they say he's got a bad name. When I say a name, you automatically think about his reputation, like Hitler or Martin Luther King or Elvis. Also, a name represents your character. You know, what you are cannot be separated from what your name is once they're identified together. In the Bible, they would often name their children after certain character qualities they wanted their kids to have, like honest and justice. So that would represent their character. Many times throughout the Bible, when somebody changed their character, their life was changed, God gave them a new name. We saw that with Abram becoming Abraham and Jacob becoming Israel. In the New Testament, Simon becomes Peter. God would change their names because He said, this represents your character. Also, your reputation, your character, it also represents authority. When a policeman stops you, he says, "Stop in the name of Bugs Bunny?" No. He says, "Stop in the name of the law." Why? Because there's authority behind that name. If you received a phone call during dinner time from a guy named Bill Brown, you'd probably say, you know, I'll take this call later. But if it was Bill Gates, you might stop and say, wait, maybe he's got something for me, you know. You might stop. Names have a representation of authority. God says, when you misuse my name, it's no little deal. He says it's a big deal because you're defaming my reputation. You're defaming my character. You're defaming my authority. And if you're using it flippantly, He commands us to take Him seriously. Number 4, have a day of rest. Now, it's interesting to me that God has more to say about taking a day off than He does about murder and than He does about adultery. In fact, it's the longest of the 10 Commandments. It's this, God's saying, you know, I want you to take this serious. This is not just some mere suggestion. God says, I'm commanding you to take a day off every single week. Exodus 20 verses 8 and 9, observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. You have 6 days in which to do your work, but on the 7th day is a day of rest dedicated to me. On that day, no one is to work. Now, that's pretty clear. No one is to work. Now, what's He talking about here? What does the word Sabbath mean? Sabbath means day of rest. And God says every 7th day you're to take a day of rest. Why is that? New Testament, Mark chapter 2, Jesus said the Sabbath was made to benefit man and not man to benefit the Sabbath. God says, I'm doing this and I'm doing it for your benefit. The purpose is to prevent you from getting burnout. So every 7 days you need to get physically, emotionally, and spiritually recharged because your batteries are run down every few days. So He says, I'm doing this for your benefit. It's the antidote to burnout, the prevention against the stress-filled world that we live in. And God says, every single 7 days, I want you to do this. So when is it? Is it Saturday? Is it Sunday? Is it Friday? I'd say it really doesn't matter. The answer is once a week. God doesn't really care as long as you do it once a week. And again, we talked about the 3 religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. The Muslims celebrate the Sabbath on Friday. The Jews celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday. And Christians celebrate the Sabbath on Sunday. But really, if you go through your Bible, not one place in the Bible does God command you that you have to worship on Sunday. You say, well, what are we here for then? Well, in the New Testament, the first Christians took the Jewish Sabbath and began to celebrate it on Sunday in honor of Jesus' resurrection. In the book of Revelation, John calls it the Lord's Day. So it became custom of Christians because Jesus rose on Sunday to celebrate the day off, Sabbath being on Sunday. Now, being a preacher, I can't necessarily take Sundays as my day off. It'd make church a bit hard for the rest of you if I did. So my day off is on Fridays. And friends, I try to take this very, very seriously. Fridays is down days for me. It's a day where I wear sweats around the house and I watch SportsCenter a few times to make sure I don't miss anything. Maybe you tried to call me on Friday. I didn't answer the phone, but I got a machine. You can leave me a message. If it's important, I'll get back to you that day. But for my sake, following God's rules, I need to be unavailable. That's the way it should be. In fact, Paul says in Romans 14, every day alike belongs to God. On questions of this kind, one must decide for himself. If you have special days for worshiping the Lord, you are trying to honor Him. He says here, all days are God's days. Say, okay, well then every day is my Sabbath. No, that's like saying this job is everybody's job. You know, everybody's job becomes nobody's job. The same thing is true with worship. If you say, every day I worship God, no, you should pick one specific day where your focus is on worship. God says, pick one specific day a week and use it for rest and recreation and restoration and worship. Recharge yourself. God commands us to do it. Number 5, a very hard one for many of you. Honor your parents. Honor your parents. Now, how am I supposed to do that? Well, it depends on what stage of life you're in. You see, every single stage you apply this command differently. As a child, I honor my parents by obeying and by respecting them. Ephesians 6:1 says, children, obey your parents. This is the right thing to do because God has placed them in authority over you. It says to obey, to do what they say willfully, pleasantly, immediately. The Bible teaches as long as you're under your parents' roof, you're supposed to obey them. Since you are dependent upon your parents for food and clothing and shelter and insurance, they have the right to call the shots in your life, whether you like it or not. And yes, when you're out on your own, that's a different issue. But as long as they're providing for you, as long as you're dependent upon them, the Bible says that you've got to obey them. Let's take that a step further for teenagers. I honor my parents by accepting and appreciating them. Now believe me, the older you get, you start seeing the faults of your parents. We all have been there. You start seeing their hang-ups and their faults. You see the chinks in their armor. And it becomes important for you to accept them in spite of their weaknesses. Now, why should I choose to accept my parents? You say, I didn't have a choice of who my parents were. Well, surprise, they didn't have a choice either. Kind of stuck with each other. That's why acceptance is vital. Now, today in our society, it's not so popular to honor your parents. It is to lay on a couch and blame your parents for every problem you've ever had. Proverbs 20:20 says, if you curse your parents, your life will end like a lamp that goes out in the dark. I believe that bitterness is self-destructive. It always hurts you more than the person that you're bitter against. And even today, if you're still hurting and being resentful and bitter over things your parents did in the past, you're still allowing them to control your life today. Oh, you make me so mad. You're admitting, you make me. You have control over me. Then also I would say, honor your parents as an adult. I honor my parents by affirming and not abandoning them. For many parents growing older, the older they get, the less respect they get. All their affirming friends, they start to die off. They're no longer wanted in the marketplace for their skills and for their wisdom. Their grown children are busy with their own families. A lot of them lead very lonely lives. I would say your parents have a great need, a desperate need to feel and to know that they've made some kind of a positive contribution in your life. They need affirmation. God says He wants you to affirm your parents the rest as long as they're alive. I lost my mom about 6 or 7 years ago. I still have a stepfather, and I try to communicate with him regularly. And again, he doesn't have much in common with me, but I need to make sure he knows I still value him. Even though I don't necessarily agree with him about everything, I still have to appreciate and affirm him. Number 6, don't murder. A lot of you thinking probably we can skip this one. Probably your urge to murder doesn't happen very often unless you're spending time in the Walmart parking lot. My guess is in our church we don't have more than 15 or 20 professional hitmen here. So we think we really don't need this one. Clarence Darrow said, I haven't killed anybody, but I've read a whole lot of obituaries with glee. I like that. Let me throw this at you, though, for fodder, okay? More statistics. I love the statistics. Think about the kids.